The murder of John Price by Katherine Knight. I got to say, it's one of the most brutal, macabre murders I've heard about in homicide.
What struck me was the number of stabbings and then the sheer calculated removal of someone's complete skin.
Someone has literally been decapitated, but also skinned.
Completely. I was also lucky enough to be in a one-man station when you were at your station, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. It was your station. You weren't called in to fill holes in the roster at Goulburn. You weren't sent to any other stations to fill in a gap just because of staffing issues. That was your station, and that's where you worked.
How long had you been in the cops before you took on a one-man station?
I was just under 4 years. I stayed at Cessnock for a couple of years. We had a bit of a bikie problem there for a few years with the Bandidos and the Comancheros, moving into that Hunter Valley area. Prior to just getting designated, we had a Woodcock murder. He was murdered in his own home and had his head almost severed by a machete attack. John Price was a hard-working, hard-drinking coal miner. On the 1st of March 2000, he didn't turn up for work. The week before, when he said, "Mate, I think she's going to do something to me," they raced up to his house and they got to the front door, and on the front door, the architrave, there was a splatter of blood. Front door was locked, so they just rang the cops. And they sort of struck us a little bit strange. What is this thing hanging in the doorway? When they actually got right to the doorway, they realised that it was a human skin hanging on a nice steel butcher's hook over the top of the architrave.
The I Catch Killers podcast was a fresh start for me, as I left policing behind and started a new life. Over the years, we've laughed together, cried, and shared some powerful moments. Welcome to I Catch Killers.
Welcome to another episode of I Catch Killers. When today's guest and I finished the detectives training course back in 1990, we were young, fresh-faced and ready to take on the world as newly designated detectives. We had no idea where our careers were going to take us, but we were excited. Our paths went off in different directions, but we got to see things in life most people don't get to see or experience. That's just part of being a detective. Today's guest, retired Detective Sergeant Bob Wells, has had an interesting career. He worked in the country at one-man police stations. He worked as a detective in country areas and also as a rescue squad operator. And he also led a homicide investigation that I have to say was one of the most brutal and macabre murders I've heard about in my entire time in homicide. I'm talking about the murder of John Price by his partner, Katherine Knight. Knight is the first woman in Australia to be given a life sentence without parole. When you hear about the nature of the crime, you'll understand why. Bob is going to talk to us about his career, including his dealings with murderer Katherine Knight, and the personal price he's paid as a frontline police officer. I think a listener warning is probably appropriate here, given the nature of the crime Bob will be discussing. Bob Wells, welcome to I Catch Killers.
Thanks, Gary.
Well, I've got to say, last time, it could be the last time, was probably when we walked out as newly designated detectives back in 1990.
1990, that was it, yes. I was pretty proud of myself that day.
It was a big day, wasn't it?
Well, I'm not an academically inclined guy, so the detective course for me was quite hard.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, we had that conversation the other day, and I wanted to raise it with you because I didn't want to say it if you said, no, it was easy. That was a very, very hard course.
It was. I think it was the last course that was actually held in Sydney before it moved to the academy in Goulburn.
Yeah. And I remember, and we were talking about it the other day, that if you failed the exams or the brief of evidence that you had to put through, you were cut from the course.
That's it.
You're given the tap on the shoulder and said, see you later.
Don't come Monday. And I think it's changed since then dramatically, actually.
Yeah. We were talking about the detectives course a couple of episodes back, and the way that they're graded or designated. But I've got to say, with the course, when you did walk out as a detective then, that was one of my proudest moments in the cops because you had to work so hard for it.
Oh, you did, yeah, 100%. Like I said, I wasn't academically inclined, and I guess the reason behind that was I only went to high school for two reasons. One was to see my mates and sport.
Yeah.
So I wasn't academically...
You look back at those days and think, geez, we could have paid a little bit more attention, but I understand where you're coming from. But, walking out of there, that's not to say that we didn't have fun, but I still do not remember studying as hard as I studied during those 6 weeks, because it was done in 2 blocks, but the final 6 weeks, I think, and just study every night, every weekend.
Well, I was down from the country, so... And I think there was half a dozen of us, and we were at the old...
you had the party house.
We had the party units, yeah.
Yeah.
and we settled had a little bit of fun at night. I mean, a lot of the inner city guys sort of went home, but a lot stayed on, and we had quite a few great nights at the old Elizabeth Hotel, just across the road. So a lot of fun was had. It was a lot of fun was had. Yeah, it was good. But getting back to the serious side of it, yeah, it was taxing for me.
Yeah, well, no, I found it the same way, and the fact that you talked about drinking, it seemed to be synonymous with life as a detective and working hard and drinking hard back in those days. But
it was part of the culture.
Yeah, I think that's a way of putting it, the culture. Now, we got so much to talk about, your career in the country and working in a one-man station, your career as a detective. But one of the cases that your career is going to be linked with, whether you like it or not, is the murder of John Price by Katherine Knight.
Yes.
And that was back in 2000, and I got to say, it's one of the most brutal, macabre murders I've heard about all my time in homicide. We're going to delve deeply into that because I want you to take us on the whole journey through the investigation, because you led that investigation, and Katherine Knight is now convicted of the murder and has been sentenced to life imprisonment with no parole. Can you just tell us, just to get a sense of it, what you discovered when you first went to that crime scene?
Well, basically the crime scene was fairly horrific. It was there was a lot of blood, which you would imagine would be in such a thing. But what struck me was, I mean, I've done a couple of stabbing murders during my career, and a stab is a stab, once or twice, but the number of stabbings and then the sheer calculated removal of someone's complete skin and decapitation is something that you think about how crafted and how skilled the person would have been that would have done that, how long it would have taken, why it was done, and the consequences that it was going to hold for myself and my workmates as a result of that investigation.
Yeah, so that's what you were confronted with when you've come into the crime scene, that someone has literally been decapitated but also skinned.
Completely.
Yeah.
And I think it was to see someone's full, whether you'd call it a pelt or a skin, just hanging on a butcher's hook in a doorway is just a very confronting situation.
Okay. Well, look, we'll probably start off on a low talking about that, because it's a horrific crime, and I want to talk a little bit about the victim in that, because it shouldn't be forgotten. But the investigation, how it played out, and what your impressions of Katherine Knight were, because you got to interview her and an understanding of it. So let's lighten it up a little bit.
Yep.
And before we get into that, cops, you came from a policing family.
My father was a police officer. He was a motorcycle, the old STP before the High Patrol was renamed or rebadged, so as they say. And then his brother, my uncle, was also in the police force. But so I sort of grew up around cops, mainly through the social outings of my parents, my father, those sorts of things. I was always around cops.
Yeah.
So it wasn't strange to me, but it wasn't exactly something that I aspired to because of that situation.
Right, so it was, you were familiar with it, but it wasn't, you didn't wake up and say, I'll grow up.
Yeah, like some kids grow up and they want to be a fireman, they want to be a policeman, they want to be whatever. I never had. That was probably one of the last things that entered into my mind as a career. So
what swung you there?
What swung me there was I was quite happy where I was working at the time, and I wasn't a straight out of school graduate into the police. I wasn't an ex-cadet. I actually didn't sort of move towards thinking about joining the police until I was 21.
Yeah,
and it was through conversations with my father about I wanted to back in the 1970s. There wasn't a lot of superannuation around for people, and I've always sort of wanted to look to my future for myself and my family in relation to financial matters and financial stability for the future. So where I was actually working, I really enjoy working there, but there was none of those benefits for the people for the people where I worked. So it was just through a casual conversation with my father one day. He said, well, what do you think about joining the cops? They've got a great superannuation scheme.
Some good advice.
It was about the best advice I ever got from him. But, so I looked at it and thought, well, okay, I'll have a crack. So he drove me down to Sydney. I went in and the rest is history. It took me a couple of cracks to
you were telling me about that. Talk us through that. That the first time you didn't make it when you applied. And this is late 70s?
This is in about 1977, 78.
Okay, yep.
And the only entrance criteria then was to pass a spelling. In those days we still had height, chest measurement, that sort of thing. So I had those categories covered. The spelling, I thought I was a reasonably good speller. However, I went into this room and there was about 80 prospective young people there. And I found the spelling to be quite hard, actually. It was, I thought, oh, geez, I didn't expect this sort of thing. But I only failed by a couple of words. And out of that 80-odd people that were in that room that day, I think only 3 or 4 passed that went through. And I was given a tap on the shoulder and said, listen, mate, you weren't far away, but I just can't push you through on the couple you got wrong. So just take a bit of advice. Next time you see an advertisement in the Daily Telegraph for wanting police recruits, come back down. He said, I think you'll find the spelling a lot easier.
And was that just regulating because you had 80 people there and you were only going to take the
well, they'd only just filled the class, I think, and they didn't really want recruits, but they had
just kept making the words harder.
Well, I think they had a program of they would have so many entrance exams every week or fortnight. So the numbers that fronted up, they were probably weeded out until they wanted recruits by the difficulty of the spelling I met. That was my impression. So I went back when I saw an advertisement a few months later. Plus, I brushed up a little bit on spelling. And look, I went back in the next time and there was 60 people in the room and everybody passed with flying colours because basically most of the words didn't extend beyond 6 letters.
Cat sat on that.
Yes,
pretty
much. So,
I'd forgotten about that side of policing. Like I forgot about the spelling test, and I remember standing there practicing words like catch, C-A-T-C-H, catch. Harder words than that, but you had a list of words and you had to remember them as best you could.
Well, I think eventually, and you knew why, was because there was so much paperwork in the cops in those days.
100%, and your typing skills. Okay, so you've eventually learnt how to spell cat and mat and sat.
Got through that.
You got through that, but then you had another hurdle.
Failed the blood pressure. Young, fit, 21-year-old, high blood pressure. Anyway, to cut the story a little bit shorter, I went to see my GP about why I might have had high blood pressure. He checked my blood pressure and it was perfect. He said, I think you're just suffering a little bit of nerves and you get a little bit excited and your blood pressure increases. He said, just try and relax a little bit when you go in and have one of these tablets if you want to. Half of this tablet might calm you down. I think it was a Serapax, I think. Anyway, I had that half a tablet and I passed with flying colours eventually of the blood pressure test. Then went through the psych test, which was very, very, I think old Dr. Peterson was one of the GMOs on that one. So I got through that. And eventually waited. And actually, you had to nominate some people. And normally you nominated the parents of good friends of yours, and they were interviewed. Yeah. The usual thing. And then got to start. Got to start in 1979.
Okay. So some of the stations you worked at, Eastwood, Gosford.
It started off as one of the Gosford, I think they used to call them the Gosford Tong in those days, because I think most people who lived in Gosford or the Central Coast area were stationed strategically at places like Hornsby, Chatswood, Eastwood, basically because of the distance to travel. And you were called by the locals as the Gosford Tong in those days. Anyway, I did part of my probation those first 6 weeks with a buddy at Gosford. Yep. Then got speared back to Eastwood, where I worked for another 12 months, bit over before. Coming from the country, I grew up in the coalfields area of the Hunter Valley in the little town called Weston near Kurri Kurri. As a country boy, I just wanted to get out of the city. It wasn't the go for me. Yeah. And also Eastwood in those days was a bit of it was a fairly quiet station. Yeah. So you really wanted in your probation, because when I first started, you didn't even want to have a day off. Yeah.
So you enjoyed it when you got in there as a probationary constable out in the truck?
It was a complete eye-opener, The camaraderie in that amongst the guys was unbelievable. But it was just the sheer experience of seeing things that most of the public don't get to see. It just popped up every day, day in, day out, and there was always something. Even for a quieter station, there was always something happening. Was it industrial accident? And you looked at things and thought, wow, like this is just. Yeah, I'd never seen a dead body before I joined the cops.
Yeah.
Used to go to dead-ends and that sort of thing, and I'll never forget the first dead body I ever saw. It was just a guy went missing in one of the old home units just around the police station, and they said, mate, you're going to climb you're the probationer, you're going up that ladder, and you're going, because he had about 5 double deadlocks on his door in the unit, had to go through the window, and I could see this body lying in a bed with a handkerchief over his face, of all things, but... and I'm bouncing on the windowsill, trying to yell out to this guy. His name was Errol. Anyway, in the end, I just toppled over and I just crashed all of the Venetian blinds off the window, landed on the floor upside down, fighting my way out of the
Venetian
blinds just to have a look at old mate and get to the light switch to get it on, and he was just deceased in bed. So that's my experience of the first dead person I've ever seen, and it was...
They're bizarre experiences, and they're hard to prepare you for them, aren't they? You go in there with your eyes open, and it's just, okay, this is the world a lot of people don't get to see.
Yeah, exactly. Well, a lot of relatives I get to find the elderly relatives deceased and those sorts of things, but that's more personal for them. But this sort of started the ball rolling where this became a, it was just, in the end, it was just, there was nothing to be worried about. There was nothing to be nervous about. There's nothing to be shocked about. Throughout the career,
And did your personality type? Did you feel like the job fitted you? Like it was something that you were glad you discovered it?
I think so. Well, I think so. Yeah, because most of the guys I worked with, 90% of the guys I worked with were just fantastic people.
Yeah.
You've got to have a sense of humour. I thought I had that. So. And I think that's part of your debriefing, to have a sense of humour. Some people who bottle things up from the word go are going to struggle with that particular lifestyle.
Yeah, and that's a positive. Like, police often get criticised about the culture, and there was problems with the culture, but there's also some positives about the culture that the black humour that we have, the way that you deal with the tragedies that you confront each day in the cops.
And you only use that amongst your workmates.
Yeah.
And it was, it is an exclusive club.
Yeah.
I don't care what anybody says. I think it's probably like the military. It's probably like the Ambos and the Fireys. They have that exclusivity about the culture within their organisation.
Well, it's in the terminology. Like, you join the police, you join the army, you join the ambulance. You don't, other careers.
Yeah, you don't attend it.
Yeah, they don't describe it that way.
Oh, 100%. You do join it. And it put a bit of discipline in my life, early life, especially in your junior ranks. And sometimes that's a thing a lot of people like, because it lessens them on making certain decisions. They just learn to follow and do as they're told and do quite a good job. It's when you move on to the supervisory roles that things can get a little bit harder.
Yeah. Well, did you have a good role model when you first, the people that you identified and thought, that's the type of cop I want to be?
I did when I went to Goulburn, actually.
Yeah.
Had a mentor that I worked a lot with, who was a sergeant by the name of Pat Cole, who ended up at the academy where he deserved to be, because he was just that sort of guy who can get across to people.
Yeah.
But I really worked a lot in uniform with Pat, and hence he was an old one-man station from down the Southern Highlands before he got a sergeant's job at Goulburn, and I really looked up to Pat Cole and his style of policing and just the person that he was also, and that sort of bumped me along to wanting that one-man station and working in the...
Yeah, you said that before we started the podcast, that you wanted a one-man station. I can understand the attraction. There's something about it, but it's also a little bit daunting and very lonely with the responsibility that comes with a one-man station.
I think the Southern Highlands is not a busy place.
Southern Highlands, for people that don't, we're talking round the Goulburn area.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a terribly cold place in winter. There's not a lot of crime there wasn't back in these days.
Yeah.
The late 70s and early 80s. Collector was a very, very quiet little one-man station. But I was also lucky enough to be in a one-man station when you were at your station, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Right.
It was your station. You weren't called in to fill holes in the roster at Goulburn. You weren't sent to any other stations to fill in a gap just because of staffing issues. That was your station, and that's where you worked.
How long had you been in the cops before you took on a one-man station?
I was just Just under 4 years.
Okay. Well, 4 years, you've get thrown in the deep end. You start to know your trade after 4 years.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I got my first hook when I was at Collector. So
because I haven't spoken to someone running it like a one-man station. So Collector, describe the town.
Very, very small town, mainly farmers, farming families. There was a couple of garages in town. The old Federal Highway ran right through the middle of town. Summer was generally extremely quiet. Winter had hotted up a little bit because of the sheer volume of traffic that flowed through that town.
Going for the snow.
Heading to the snow, especially around that first week in June. The opening of the ski season, it was just headlights from as far as you could see from Collector heading towards Queanbeyan.
Yeah.
Along Lake George. And that was the busy time. That was the times when people were impatient. They overtook when they shouldn't have. Head-on collisions, a lot of fatal accidents, a lot of accidents with extremely severe injuries. And in those days, there was no radio coverage. When you were along Lake George, you had to rely on, as a police officer, getting someone in a car that could get into Collector to get to the public phone to ring you an ambulance from Goulburn. So you could be anywhere on the side of the road with severely injured people for quite a long time without you got any assistance from the ambulance. And in those days, as a young guy with people severely injured and people dead, to see a set of ambulance lights coming across that straight along Lake George to where you were was just a huge relief.
So, Bob, you're talking here, I would assume, one-man station, you're responding to these accidents on your own. You go there and you find people deceased, people injured, and just so confronting and people needing urgent attention. And you're stuck there and you're not on a radio, you've got no coverage.
There's no mobile phones in those days either. And, you know, and everybody wanted a piece of you. You know, people who weren't injured, who'd pulled up, witnesses, those sorts of things. They all wanted your attention all at the same time, so it was sort of, you know, a little bit daunting, you know.
Because you're wearing the blue uniform, they expect you know everything.
Yeah, and you can do everything. Just sometimes you can't.
How'd that play on you personally? Like, I spent a long time in homicide, and I saw some horrific things in homicide, but I still remember the accidents I went to where you see people dying or they're trapped in cars and screaming out for help. How did that affect you?
Well, it didn't really affect me at the time, and you realise as you go through your career, and looking back, that was the start. That was the start of the undoing of most police officers.
Right, the build-up of the stress and the...
Exactly,
yeah.
And the pressure.
Yeah. That
you eventually get to that 20 year plus period in your career when you've made the cops a career. I don't think many people make the cops a career anymore.
Yeah.
They don't go to it. The people like I'm talking about current time now, don't really go to look and say, well, I'm going to spend 30 to 40 years in this job and make it a career and claw my way to the top. I don't think that is in the majority of people who go into the organisation now. But back when I did, everybody sort of, I'm going to make a career out of this because, you know, but I found out around that 20 years that those sorts of things, when I didn't want to have a day off when I first joined.
Yeah.
I said, I don't want a day off. I want to keep going. This is fantastic. I've never seen anything like this in my life. You know, and then and those things, the pressure wasn't there then. It was just your job, you know. And then when you get to that 10-year period, your job goes, oh, you know, I like some good parts about the job, but there's jobs I don't like going to. I don't. But you've got to do them because that's your job.
Do you think you get to that point where initially everything was exciting, even the horrific stuff? Like, I never thought I'd see this, and you're doing it. And then when you realise, I've seen this before, I don't need to see this again, and it just wears you down a lot. That starts.
That starts. But you don't. What we're talking about at Collector was when I look back at the start.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, but you know, I did have one incident. The only other incident that really shook me a little bit was we had quite a large number of properties in. It was a property called Lerida Station, which had a number of workers working on it, and I went to a call of a domestic one night, and I went up I knew these people. I went up to the house, and just as I got to the front door, it was ajar. As I opened it, the husband stuck a 22 straight in my stomach, and it just sheer instinct, and I think, and he's fairly intoxicated. I just, the reaction was to grab the rifle of that gun and just point it straight in the air.
Yeah.
And I managed to get it off him, you know. and arrest him. But that sort of started again, as I looked back, another start of the.
Well, they're confronting things. They have a drunken, aggressive man with a rifle stuck in your stomach and pull the trigger, and who knows what happens.
That's right. Yeah.
And that you face that on your own. What was it like in a one-man station? Because you're 24/7 a cop there. You don't. People don't look at you anything different whether you're working or not. You're still the cop. Could you have a social life there? Could you have a life?
Oh, we did have a great social life there because of the small town. They're very social.
Yeah.
Good hotel owner, and I sort of a little bit the twig with me with looking at the plain clothes guys when I was at the one-man station was Collector was strategically placed between Goulburn and Queanbeyan.
Yeah.
Where you had detectives officers who just love to say, let's catch up halfway at Collector and we'll get Wellesley out to the station, you'll come down and have a beer with us. Which was the phone would ring and say, get out here, there's a blue on at the pub, and of course you knew their voices and you said, right, yeah. I'm on my way. And off you'd go, and I got to know a lot of the detectives from the Queanbeyan, Yass and the Goulburn area fairly well, but plus working at Goulburn early before I went to Collector. But yeah, but the townspeople were really, really great people.
Yeah.
And they had lots of social things, and they were mainly to raise money for things like the school. It was only a very small school, which had, I think at its one point when I was there, I think there was 12 children, and I think 7 of those were from the one family. Right. So, and also those one-manners in those days, when you went there, you automatically became the president of the P&C Association. Yeah. You became secretary of the cricket club, and you became another office holder with some other social club in the town, and those sorts of things. So you sort of, if you went there as a cop, you went there as one of the linchpins of the town and the community.
Did you have any ugly situations there where people that you were friends with, you had to,
No, never.
Yeah.
Oh, one, yes, sorry. The publican's son, I had to knock him off for a bit of pot.
Right. Okay.
Which was a hurdle that the publican and I got over.
Oh, okay. Well, you got to manage your way through that.
Exactly. Yeah. But not seriously.
Not seriously. Okay. No. You left there. Were you married at the time?
I was married at the time and went through a marriage breakdown whilst at Collector, and I was there for a little while longer as a lone person because the super at the time wanted me out of the place virtually. Didn't care that you'd gone through a marriage breakdown, you might be suffering any form of sadness, know. Just get out because we need a married man in there. And I thought, oh, geez, you're such a caring person.
So you were, sorry, just run this past. So you were there living at the station?
Yes.
Like the accommodation was at the station, the police station's at the front of the house, and
yes.
You're out there. And then when your marriage broke up, no, we need a married man here.
Oh, it's got to be. That's our policy. Righto.
But I'm upset. My marriage.
Where am I going to go? Where are you going to send me? Oh, we don't care. Have a look around. Anyway, cut a long story short, there's a really great guy, and he's since passed in a motorcycle accident. It was Ray Smith.
Yeah.
And Ray Smith was a legend amongst the High Patrol in those days, especially in the Southern Highlands area. Yeah. But he was also our association rep at Goulburn. And he came down and saw me and said, listen, mate, you don't have to go anywhere.
Yep.
He said, because there's a couple of little things just slipped into the organisation that the organisation is pushing very hard, along with the state government, which is equal employment opportunity and anti-discrimination. So he said, leave it to me. So he went and saw the boss and said, mate, you can't just flick this bloke.
Yeah.
He's just been through an ordeal of a breakdown of a marriage. I said, he's not travelling that well emotionally because of that reason, and you just want to flick him. He said he's not going anywhere until he decides he wants to move because he's got you knackered with the anti-discrimination and the equal employment opportunities that you're now throwing around like, getting yourself promoted over, I guess, to throw that pun in there. But
you're such a cynic.
Yes, and so I was there for quite some time until I decided I had to make the move. The opportunity came back to go back to my home area, opportunity for a transfer to Cessnock, back where my parents were, and so I took that opportunity and moved back to the Hunter Valley.
Okay. And you, it was around that time that you started to have ambitions of becoming a detective?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Look, general duties is the backbone of the force, and I've always said that. And but it wasn't enough once I got my teeth into the organisation or the job, and what it was about. I just wanted a little bit more than just what the general run of general duties was in those days. I just wanted that, just a little bit extra, and I thought plain clothes would give that to me. So I made an application and got a start on the gaming squad in Newcastle.
Okay, what did that involve?
There was mainly just doing all the old SP bookies, a bit of gaming, the old illegal two-up games and different things that are run after race meetings, things like that. And as far north, and we went as far north as our area was from Newcastle, actually the Hawkesbury River Bridge to Tweed.
Yeah.
So we did all that, and we were sort of ostracised a little bit by some of the other squads. You're just picking on the poor old SP bookie, you're this, that, and the other, and we were sort of looked down a little bit amongst some of the other squads like the Arthur squad or the Breakers or the Homicide Boys and stuff like that, because most of my mates were the SP bookies, I guess. But
how dare you suggest that, Bob?
But I mean to say most of the informants in that sort of crime were basically women with kids and no money because the husband had come home with no pay packet because he just put it all on the horses, or he'd just been to a two-up game, and all of a sudden they were all the informants.
I'll fix this problem.
You know, and they were ringing up all the time, and they say, hey, there's a two-up game on a Bathurst. I remember going to Bathurst one night and sneaking up and running in and with just two of us, and there was 120 people in there after the Bathurst trots, and they were all into it.
Yeah.
They had party pies, they had caterers there, they had the whole box.
So you going in covertly, or you
just ran through the door, mate, and all you got to do was grab the kit.
Yeah.
Which is the bag full of money and the two-up coins.
So that sounds like something out of the Wild West.
Anyway, we ran 100 people through the charge book at Bathurst that night.
What? You sealed the doors off? You're all under arrest.
That's it.
But there's only two of you.
Oh no, there's another half a dozen outside.
All right. Okay.
But those sorts of things. So, but that was another eye opener to just see how some people what they do for entertainment.
Yeah.
But there was some big money getting thrown around, and especially we did a lot of work with the Telstra guys for people using home units to take like big books.
Oh, that's when they had all the lines set up. And
all the lines set up on the phones, and there was some big, like huge amounts of money going through all of that, you know. And there was one little one, if you want to hear it.
Yes.
It was another Bathurst job where there was a huge book working on the betting on a Saturday on the races, and I'm talking probably money that would be up around the $500,000 on a Saturday.
Okay, so
going through these phone lines, and it was to an old house just out of Bathurst, an old house, just vacant blocks either side and vacant blocks at the back. Anyway, well, the Telstra guys that we were said, mate, that's it, it's going on right in there. So we snuck up to the front door with a sledgehammer and a warrant. And said, open the door or we'll break it down, because we could hear the races on inside, the radio's blaring. So we smashed the door down because no one would answer the door. And when we got in there was an 82-year-old woman lying in the bath with the radio on, and she had 4 tab tickets.
Did you? Okay. That's a big arrest, Bob. That's one of the biggest arrests I've heard on I Catch Killers. Congratulations.
It was massive, but it shows you that the corruption that was in Telstra at the time, because what they did, they just diverted the lines into that house.
Yeah.
And we eventually got the book about 2 hours later, and it was all in the back of a small goods factory there.
Fun and games.
So they just diverted the phone to this poor little old woman's house.
Yeah.
And the Telstra guys that were with us said, mate, that's the place. It's all happening in there. That's where the phone line goes in. Better to beans.
Like we laugh about it, and you think, as you said, it's usually the ladies at home that can't feed their kids because hubby's put he's got a gambling on the horses.
They call it a gambling addiction these days.
Yeah.
Back in those days, they it was an addiction, but that word wasn't used. They were just hopeless.
Didn't see the damage.
And look, we did a lot of travel, had a lot of fun, and I said my retirement function really about the only thing the gaming squad did for me was lower my golf handicap a couple of shots.
Okay.
So,
Well,
but
yeah.
it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. And we did do some good jobs. We got some big books and those sorts of things. But that was just, we still look back, and I talk to guys sometimes, mate, do you remember that time at Bathurst with the poor old lady in the bath?
That's
And
pretty
the
funny.
biggest part of the job was getting the door fixed on a Saturday.
After you hit it with a sledgehammer.
Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, not an overkill there, Bob.
Yeah,
You
just a touch.
Okay, but look, these are some of the fun aspects of policing. Like, you've gone from telling funny stories and getting your golf handicap down because you're doing so much travel. You've had a gun stuck in your belly when you attended a domestic situation, and you've been to car accidents where you're there on your own and people are dying and severely injured.
Yeah.
You got to take the good times with the bad times.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
So after you're feeling your way in the gaming and betting, where did you go to?
I got a bit of a start on A-list at Maitland.
Yep.
Frank Tracy was the detective
Could we
sergeant.
just explain what A-list is? That's the start of your detective training. You had to get, and they just called the position A-list.
A-list. You would share the A-list position around with a number of other
Yep.
uniformed constables who were interested, and also it was an opportunity for the detectives to see whether you were suited as much as you thought you might have been suited to that style of
Policing.
So that's how the A-list works. So I got a start on the A-list at Maitland, and then an opportunity came. They were just upping the strength at Cessnock Detective's office to another position, adding a position to it, a detective sergeant and 3 constables. So that was offered to me, which I took. And then from there, it was from Cessnock that I worked with Alex Pollock, who was a fantastic mentor to me, and a great friend, and still is today. We still
Yeah, he's got a good
socialise.
reputation, Alex.
Yeah, great guy. Anyway, we got a start there, and that's where I got designated and the detectives
At
course.
the detectives course came there. And after, when was it that we finished the detectives course? I think May 1990. I think it was.
I think it was June, around about
Right.
June. It was because it was starting to get a bit cold. But anyway, yeah, I remember.
We finished on the Friday. I remember I was at that Sunday night, first job as a detective, hadn't even had the weekend off, and I was called out to the Brooklyn train disaster where 6 people, 2 trains collided on a Sunday night, and called out to that, and that was my work as a detective for the next 6 months. I was working on that inquiry. You just didn't know what was going to happen. Where did your life go after we were designated and walked out?
Well, I stayed at Cessnock for a couple of years, and we did. We had a bit of a bikie problem there for a few years. There was a bit of toing and froing with the Bandidos and the Comancheros, moving into that Hunter Valley area. So we did a lot of work on that. We prior to just getting designated, we had the Woodcock murder. He was murdered in his own home and had his head almost severed by a machete attack, and which was a long, protracted inquiry.
What was the go there? Who?
Well, Woodcock had come home he was an alcoholic, came home from the club one night, or the pub one night, and he'd won a fish pack at the pub raffles and cooked those fish up, and when we got to the murder scene the next day, the fish had been cooked but was left in the pans on the stove, and the stove was turned off. Georgie Woodcock was found in the. He was a local and this is in my hometown at Weston, and he was found in the front bedroom with horrific injuries and almost a severed head in relation to the attack on him, and a lot of work went into that case, and it went on and dragged on, and it was a bit over 12, and that's where I was introduced to Dennis Miles O'Toole.
Sorry, and not an in-joke. Well, it is a bit of but Dennis O'Toole, Miles O'Toole. He's been on the podcast. He was in the first season.
Yes.
I absolutely love the man. I actually worked some murders up around Cessnock, and I don't know what you're going to say about Dennis Miles O'Toole, but I tell you, everywhere we went, so many people go, "Oh, do you know Dennis?"
Do you know Dennis?
He's left an awesome reputation up round your way.
Look, we became very good friends, and part of this investigation, he ended up being christened within the Hunter Valley as Toga O'Toole because of an after investigative day soiree into the vineyards, you might say, which ended up
I'm sure he won't sue. Keep going.
which ended up at a wedding reception somewhere with us all wearing togas, and ended up in the swimming pool. But anyway, he was a fantastic guy, and that was when I was first introduced to the. I don't know if you remember the old MERS program.
No, what was that one?
The MERS program was invented by two young cops.
Yep.
It was as computers were coming into the organisation.
Yeah.
You know, because when I first joined, like there was a computer that had been installed on the desk at Eastwood, and no one went near it.
No, you didn't trust those things.
Well, you never went near it anyway, because no one knew what to do with it, because it was just put there. And then when I went to Goulburn, the same thing, and no one went near it until you got some training on it. So everything was done by telex or the phone in those days. But the MERS was invented as it was a MIIRS, and it was the long name was Murder Investigation Indexing System.
Ah, yes.
Where they break it down into categories.
Yeah.
So two young, and this is more a way to show how the cops operated in those days, and probably still do today. It was quite a good system, but there was 7 categories within it. So it was my job in that murder investigation to run the MERS system.
Yeah.
And I just got it down pat when the two young cops that invented it were still waiting to get paid by the organisation because they had copyright on it.
Yep.
And the organisation told them where to go, and they said, well, thanks.
Okay.
Go and find your own murder investigation indexing system by someone else, because you're not using ours. So I was halfway through that, so we had to...
Because the Tim's must have been the forerunner.
Tim's came after it.
Yeah, okay.
Then they went
that
to
makes
Tim's.
sense, because we're on the card system, and so that got a short run, and then
Yeah,
Tim's
there was that little period between MERS and Tim's until someone invented Tim's, but the MERS guy said, that's ours, mate. You can't use it.
Okay.
So that was on that particular murder, and it was only that...
what was the motive for the murder?
Well, we still really don't know.
Yeah. Okay. You found your way out round Burke.
I found my way to Moree after.
Moree?
Yeah.
Yep.
Did a couple of jobs out there, and I thought, where I was going to be at Cessnock was part of the Old North region. It was part of that Newcastle area, and there was a certain attachment to the New South Wales Police, which was Newcastle, Sydney, Wollongong.
Yeah.
And I didn't see a lot of advancement for myself, promotional wise, around that Hunter Valley, Maitland, Cessnock, Newcastle area.
Yeah.
It was very competitive, like it would be in the city, but there's more opportunity here. There's less opportunity and more staff in that area. So I don't know if it was a brain snap or a crazy idea or whatever, but an opportunity came up. They were looking for a detective at Moree, where they only had a detective sergeant, but all the guys in the office were all PCs and were well off being designated. So I had an offer to go out there as a designated officer, that I would get all the relieving to sort of boost my career to experience in supervisory level. So I had a chat to my then wife and said, she was a teacher. She said, let's go. So away we went.
Okay.
Went to Moree, which I've always said to people, Moree, for all the bad publicity, for the bad name that it has, was probably the best country station I ever worked at.
Yeah.
Because everybody that went there was tight.
Mm.
It was a very tight station.
They had to support each other.
100%.
Yeah.
And they were very loyal and very tight.
Yeah.
Had the odd ones that,
didn't fit in.
Had a high turnover rate, but people went there, they knew they had 3 years. There was a goal for them at the end of the 3 years was to move on to it was sort of one of those stations where guys from the North Coast and Mid-North Coast went down and joined the cops, eventually wanted to get back to where they were born and bred. Most ways they were told, mate, go to Moree, Burke, Wilcannia,
and
Walgett.
They were considered like punishment, not punishment stations, but if you spent your 3 years out there because they were hard positions to fill,
that's right.
You then had a choice to go and
yes.
you could pick a
You're given a preference. You're given your preference, basically, and it works for 99% of the time it worked that way.
Yeah, yeah. So you enjoyed your time out there?
Oh, it was tremendous. Did a lot of
what sort of crime were you investigating? Just
general CI.
Yeah.
If there was a murder, sexual assault, GBHs, stealings, just general CI.
Okay.
From start to finish.
and upskilling yourself there. So how did you find your way back to Cessnock?
No, I did get promoted as a result of being
you sold out and decided to climb the ladder.
I went to Burke as a detective sergeant.
Yep.
When I thought
through the application process and
went through the interviews, as the system as it was then. That was about 1993.
Yeah.
And was successful in getting a spot there. No appeals. There wasn't many appeals for Burke, I would imagine. Anyway, but when I first got there, I sort of fell into a situation where not long after I went there, the young Sandra Hoare, the nurse, was murdered at Walgett.
Ian Lynch, Glenn Richardson, I think a couple of...
Well, I think it was Alec Pollux did the brief, because Alec had then gone
the on-call response I remember him talking about. Yeah, that was a horrible murder.
Alec had just gone to Dubbo, which was our district station, as the detective senior sergeant there, and sort of fell into the place where not long after Sandra was murdered and the Fernando
brothers
were charged by Alec and convicted, all of the detective staff from Walgett left. They were on transfer out. Some went off sick. So virtually Walgett was without detectives for quite some time, nearly 12 months before they got them there. So, and they had a particular little place in their
because of the nature of that crime, and
I think so. Yes, yeah. And there was other reasons. Some were due for transfer anyway, and they couldn't get anybody to go there. So they had a place called Lightning Ridge, which a lot of people know.
Yeah,
which is just full of desperados and people. It's a place where people go to be forgotten about and not be found when they're wanted. So there's a lot of crime there, and a lot of serious crime. So anytime there was something that required a bit of an investigation, I was sent across from Burke. It was a couple 100k drive for me, and a fellow by the name of mine who I've become very good friends with, and he's one of my best friends today, Doug Gott, was a detective sergeant at Dubbo, and we would normally go and do those jobs at Lightning Ridge together.
I did a fair bit of work out at Lightning Ridge, and I remember when I first pulled up there, I was confused because the cops were wearing khaki uniforms.
Yeah,
that was at the start, and then looking for a place to stay or have a drink. And
Wallangarra Motel was generally the place.
Well, whoever was in the station said, you could go to that pub there, but I reckon you'll be in a fight within 5 minutes of walking in the door. I'd suggest you go to the bowling club or the tennis club or whatever.
Yeah, well, the pub's been burnt down now.
Right, okay.
The Diggers Rest.
It is dead set Wild West out there. Interesting town. I loved working up there.
It was very interesting. And Dougie and I we did some good jobs there. Nothing that's noteworthy to the world, but we did a lot of investigations there, and we had a lot of fun. As well. So we became quite good friends, and we've remained good friends today.
Just getting back to the murder of the nurse, what do you think it rocked so many police?
Because she was the partner of one of the police officers there, young guys, and in those small country towns, when I'll go to Burke and Walgett, those two places, your social activities generally moved around amongst the police, nurses, the fireys, the ambos, and the teachers.
Yeah,
because a lot of guys who went there as cops, a lot of their wives were teachers or nurses.
Okay, makes sense.
And they were always screaming out for nurses, and in all those places, nurses, school teachers, cops, ambos, fireys. So they were all sort of interlinked. And that's where a lot of your social activities took place amongst those, functions and barbecues and fundraisers all involved those particular people, especially in those small countries. I'm talking about Walgett and those Burkes. There's only 3,500 people in those towns, and
I can see then how her murder, and it was such a brutal crime, would have impacted on people.
Oh yeah, it had a huge impact.
Yeah,
as it does in most of those small towns,
The two that were convicted, didn't one of them murder the other in prison?
Yes, eventually.
Yeah. Just a horrific story all round.
Yeah.
Okay. How did we get you back to the Hunter Valley area?
My tenure was nearing at Burke.
Yep.
And I know there was no guarantee that I would be on a 3-year tenure, but most people only do 3 years there. And I thought it was, and after the 7 years combined between Moree and Burke, I just had enough of that isolated. You got an extra week's holiday, you got a few other little bits and perks with it. Not nothing huge in those days. Not like there is today. It's completely different. And the kids, 2 young daughters who were coming to school age. One had already started kindergarten. And I thought, well, they deserve more than, they need a little bit more in their life than just Burke.
Okay.
Which was great, but and when they were toddlers and young kids, but they were getting to the age where they needed a little bit more stimulation socially and probably academically as well. So I sort of put a few feelers out. Here I am at Newcastle and Maitland. Would have liked to have gone back to that area. My wife at the time was she was from the Newcastle area, so I'd like to go back there. And of course I was told, mate, you won't be coming back here.
Yeah.
As a detective sergeant. I said, oh, okay. Well, what about as a sergeant? Well, really, mate, you can pick anywhere you like between Port Macquarie and Tweed Heads, and you can go there whatever position you want. I said, I don't want to go there, And I said, that's where I'd like to go. I said, I think I've put enough hard yards in, 7 years in the western area, in far western area. So you always like to think they'd
do the right thing by
do a little,
yeah.
do you a little favour. But anyway, it wasn't to be, and I was just flatly told, mate, you won't be coming here. Anyway, a vacant position came up for the detective sergeant at Singleton.
Yep. And
I just applied for it. And I spoke to the patrol commander there and said, listen, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring for that as a sideways move. I know I've got to go through the system again, and do the interviews, but I'm going to have a crack at it. He said, don't bother, mate. So-and-so's getting that job. He's been earmarked. So I said, is that right? So anyway, I put an application in and won the position sideways and went back to Singleton.
Right. Okay. Well, you got 7 years out in the west, and then coming back to the area you wanted. You probably deserved it. I want to start taking us into the crime that, again, and I'll keep saying it, it's one of the most macabre and brutal crimes that I've heard about in all my time in homicide, and you hear some shit there. So I want you to take our listeners right through what happened on that day, because I want to understand the investigation and right from the start. So was it a normal day when you got a call?
It was just a normal day. I'd started work at Singleton. Actually, at that stage, staffing issues again. They had no crime manager at Muswellbrook, which was the head station. And we'd gone to Lex by this time. It was in 2000.
Local area commands.
Local area commands after what I said was the failed government experiment with the commissioner at the time that took us from where we were.
Is it bringing the gentleman over from the UK?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And into
restructuring.
In the restructuring. The structure. Yep. Anyway, we'd moved to that in 97, and we're now in 2000. So there was no detective sergeant at Muswellbrook. There was no crime manager at Muswellbrook at the time. So I was filling that role, plus I was a senior detective in that command. And on that particular day, it was in Muswellbrook's area, not Singleton's, that murder took place at Aberdeen. And the young guy who there was just a PC who was working for the day.
Right.
And he said, mate, this is too much for me to handle. He rang me up. I said, well, what's the problem? He said, mate, you'll find out when you get here. He said, just get here, because he said, I need you straight away. So I was with my offsider, Mick Prentice, fantastic guy, Mick. So we jumped in. He said, it's at Aberdeen. So we jumped in the car and roared up to Aberdeen. And
how far away was that?
Aberdeen's probably a 30-minute drive with the siren going,
Yep.
and the magnetic blue light on the roof. So we got there, and I spoke to Graham Furlonger and Scotty James out the back, and there was an ambulance there, and they were just loading someone into it with, and Judy Simpson was the police lady who was going to go as a custody person, because this person being loaded into that I was later to find out was Katherine Knight, was the suspect at this stage. And
so just wind you back there for a bit, Bob. What happened to the first police when they turned up at the scene? How did people get notified about?
John Price was a hard-working, hard-drinking coal miner, worked for a coal company in Aberdeen, and irrespective of what his drinking habits were, it wouldn't matter. He would be the first at work every day.
Yeah.
But it was a couple of weeks leading in. He'd formed a relationship with Katherine Knight, and she had her own home in Aberdeen, down the main highway. John Price had his own home up a few streets away, and she would spend some nights of the week at his home,
Yep.
some nights at home in her own home. So they were sort of partially cohabitating together at that stage. Things were a bit rocky. He was a happy-go-lucky sort of guy, and I think she was starting to get a little bit shitty with his behaviour towards wanting to go to the pub, be out. I think she wanted a more homely style relationship from memory. But things had started to sour weeks before, and John Price was the type of guy who confided in his workmates.
Yeah.
And he'd said a couple of weeks before, he said, listen, I was there the other night, and I went to bed on my own. She wasn't there. And she turned up and heard a noise, and I sat up in bed. He said, and I'm sure I saw her standing at the foot of the bed with her hands behind her back, and there was a mirror on her dresser behind her. And he said, I'm sure she had her knives in her hand. And he said,
Right.
but by the time I fully woke up, she was there, but had no knives, and he had a blast watch what she was doing anyway. She stayed the night. And he started to worry because of the way she was sort of carrying on with him and her attitude towards him. So he said to my mates, mate, if I don't turn up for work one day, ring the cops because something's happened to me. Anyway, on the 1st of March 2000, he didn't turn up for work. And the guys went back to the week before when he said, mate, I think she's going to do something to me.
Yeah.
So they raced up to his house, and they got to the front door. And on the front door, the architrave, there was a splatter of blood.
Yep.
Front door was locked. So they just rang the cops straight away.
Okay.
His work boots were beside the front door, and seeing the blood on the outside, thought something's happened. His ute was parked in the driveway. He was obviously there, but they couldn't raise him. The air conditioning was going on in the house, in the bedroom part of the house. So they rang the cops, and the cops turned up. And of course, the back door was unlocked, so they went in through the back door and were confronted virtually into the kitchen. The back door went into a small laundry area, then into a kitchen dining area, with a doorway into the lounge room. And they thought, it sort of struck us a little bit strange, what is this thing hanging in the doorway? And because they were making a noise and trying to yell out for anybody who was around. And when they actually got right to the doorway, they realised that it was a human skin hanging on a nice steel butcher's hook, hooked over the top of the architrave. I think it was Graham Furlong who pushed that
Thinking it's a curtain.
skin aside, yeah, and looked in and saw the mutilated body of John Price. And then they went down the hallway of the house, which was quite severely splattered in blood, to find Katherine Knight comatose in the bed.
Okay.
Managed to wake her up and to take her down the hallway and sit her on the back steps.
I'll just hold you there, because we might take a break, because I want to deep dive into this, as horrific as it is, and yeah, with the respect to the victim, but this is a horrific crime, and people need to understand what sometimes are confronted by police and what can happen in this world. But we're talking a person that's been skinned.
Yes, which is highly irregular.
And this is and that's what was hanging from a hook.
Yes.
As the police went in there, and they pushed that aside.
Yeah.
And that's what they saw.
Yep.
Okay. Well, we've ended on a hard note, but let's take a break. And when we get back, I want to talk to you about that investigation. You led that investigation.
Yes.
And it went through the interviews, the search warrants, the trials, everything, and your impression of Katherine Knight when you sat down and spoke with her, because I think it'd be fascinating to try to get an insight into a person that's capable of committing a crime of this nature.
Yes.
So we'll talk about that when we get back on part 2.